Welcome to today's program. Please welcome University of Pennsylvania President, Dr. Amy Gutmann.
Wonderful to see you. Welcome, welcome. Today we will enjoy a conversation with one of our nation's foremost statesmen and the Benjamin Franklin Presidential Practice Professor. If there ever were somebody who needed no introduction, I think you'll agree he's the one. So please join me in welcoming Penn's own Joe Biden.
Where you want me there? Hey, folks. This reminds me of my orals every time I do this.
Reminds you of your oral exams?
My oral exams, yeah. You know what I mean? Sitting there with the president of the university and being asked questions. My orals were easier, but good to see you, Madam President.
Okay. Well, with that, I have to ask you a hard question, right? So I thought we should begin with something that's on, I think, everybody's mind, and both across the nation, the world is talking about it, and it hits us right here at home. And as you know, everyone knows, this weekend, hundreds of thousands, probably millions, marched for our lives, right? And it was organized and conceived and executed by young people, many of whom are even younger than our wonderful students. So my question to you is, we have seen protests against gun violence before in this country, many times before. This seems, I'll speak for myself, seems to me different. So let me ask you, what would make this a movement rather than simply a moment?
I think it's already become a movement. Look, I've been involved in this effort, this fight for rational gun policy. I think there's a Second Amendment. I think the Second Amendment is being very badly interpreted. It's not consistent with what our founders intended, in my view. You saw Justice John Paul Stevens say that we should, because it's been so prostituted, we should repeal the Second Amendment. It was about a standing militia. It's a long story. I won't go into all the legal side of that. I mean, taught it in law school. But there's rational and irrational policy. And like many movements that occur, if I can make the analogy to when I was your age, when I was in undergraduate and graduate school in the middle of the 60s, the war in Vietnam and a lot of other things were going on, the completion of the civil rights movement. And there's a point at which things tip into not being the exception, but being the rule. What's happened here is the nation as a whole has decided it can no longer, in my view, continue to turn a blind eye to the prostitution of the Second Amendment here. And no longer can turn a blind eye to the enormous damage being done, not just in our schools, but on our streets right here in Philly and Wilmington, Delaware, where I'm from, every night.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're seeing here is something that is spontaneous. Now, I have, in each of these massacres that have occurred, going all the way back to Columbine, I've been sort of the designated guy for the administration when I was president, when I was vice president with the president. When I was with the president. And the last major gun safety legislation that passed is the one that I wrote. It eliminated assault weapons, it eliminated the number of bullets that could be in a clip. It brought into play for the first time the Brady Bill and the background checks. It set up the NICS system. It did it all. It only passed by 7 votes, but it passed. And in the so-called Biden crime bill, it passed. But it had, in order to get it done, I had to agree that it only could be authorized for 10 years and had to be reauthorized in 10 years. But for what they call the hanging chads in Florida, it would still be the law. But President Bush let it lapse. And what happened was, I think, Madam President, is that violent crime went down precipitously after the crime bill passed. Did. And so it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And so what happened was the impact of gun violence also diminished in the minds of most people except people living in inner cities. It diminished. And there was no energy behind the change that needed to take place. Again, and one of the things that, you know, when you're in public life or you're involved in campaigns, there's a thing, a baseball expression, there's pace on the ball. And that is something that is really, really real. For example, those of you who are Democrats, if in fact you had a congressperson who agreed with you on everything, but supported a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, you probably wouldn't vote for him, most Democrats. Conversely, on the Republican side, you could have a congressman and be right on every single thing, but want to have rational gun policy, and people will vote against him. So when, for the gun issue has been much, much more important for the gun manufacturers and the NRA and the gun owners than it has been for the rest of you. And so you voted for people, or you, not you, I'm using it in an editorial sense, voted for people who in fact were good on everything but wrong on guns. You still voted for them. Well, something snaps now. This has reached a point where for those people who think there's need for rational gun policy, it's risen in terms of the importance of the issue in the minds of the voters. That's the first really important point, I think, that has to be made. The second important point that has to be made is that this was spontaneous. I spent time with the parents. Privately, there's at least 75 parents who've lost children over the last 8 years have my private phone number because I spend time with them. I know what it's like to lose a child, and I'm able to be of some help with them. And I've talked to them all, particularly all of Sandy Hook people. This case, this was totally, thoroughly spontaneous on the part of the students. There was no adult inspiration for this. They insisted. And that's why guys like me, who led on the gun issue, did not show up to speak. We wanted to make sure everybody knew this was a spontaneous, thoroughly spontaneous effort on the part of young people. And what they've done is they've forced an awful lot of elected officials they've just ripped the Band-Aid off. They've looked at them and said, why are you not willing to do things like, say, people on the terrorist list can't buy a gun? Why are you not willing to eliminate and go down the line? And they can't look them in the eye. Because the vast majority of members of the Congress who are reluctant to support rational legislation are doing it because of campaign contributions and doing it because they're afraid of that base in their own party. It seems unrelated, but there's another piece here. The two things that have changed most in the last 10 years that have altered and broken our political system is gerrymandering and unlimited funding. And what that means is Republicans, Congress, never get beaten from the right. I mean, from the left, they only get beaten from the right. Democrats don't get beaten from the right. Republicans get beaten from the right. Democrats get beaten from the left. And so we have a polarization of the parties. in ways that don't reflect where the vast majority of the American people are. And so the worry is, when I talk to some of my Republicans, why won't you vote for that? I said, Joe, you don't understand, man. If I do that, all these guys show up. It's only 30% of my constituents, but every one comes out and votes. And secondly, so-and-so will pour in $400,000 or $500,000 to take me on. I can't afford that. And so what's now happening is there's a counterweight. And I'll conclude with this. One of the things that we underestimate here, and you students know this in your gut, you have more influence on your parents than they have on you. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. Let me give you a concrete example. If you go home and sit down at your dinner table when the semester ends, or spring break, or Christmas, or wherever, and you're sitting at the table and you say, you know, Mom or Dad, I met so-and-so, candidate for such and such. I really like her. I think she's really solid. I really think, etc. Even though your parents may be of a different persuasion, I promise you when they go to bed, they look at each other, Amy really likes that woman. There must be something there. Because we take great faith and stock in what our kids arrive at independently and really believe. These millions of kids, and they're millions, they're impacting on their parents' sense of responsibility. And you're going to see it in the polls. You're going to see it change. So this is already a movement, and it's spontaneous, it's real, and I predict you it's not going to stop.
So what resonates very strongly with our students, and I've spoken to a lot of our students about it, is a very strong message of this movement, which they call Rev, Register, Educate, Vote. And you couldn't walk but a few yards in DC without someone with a clipboard that was actually registering young people as well as older people, but a lot of young people to vote. And these are young people who don't yet have, some of them aren't old enough to have the right to vote. They really appreciate the power of that. And I wonder if that also could be a very important sea change, because if you look at the percentage of young people who vote compared to the percentage of people our age who vote, it's...
You're not as old as I am.
Well, we're all in the same bucket here. It's much, it's much too low. Isn't that an important
yes,
part
it is.
of
For
what
example,
should be happening, and a message to our students?
Millennials and those who are younger like you all are, the students here, because you're now qualified to be millennials, you are in a situation where you're an incredible generation. And I know you're tired of hearing this, people say it, but it's a fact. You're the best educated, you're the most engaged, you're the most generous, you're the least prejudiced, by every measure, except one thing.
Right.
You really are lousy in terms of participating in politics. No, you really are. You really are. And the percentage of vote between the ages of 18 and 24 is abysmal. 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 No, it makes me angry, I'll tell you the truth, because you can change it. If we just increased by 10% the number of you who went out and registered and voted, if you just reached the national average, everything would be different. I don't mean marginally, everything would be different. 72,000 votes. And the outcome of the last election would have been different. 72,000 votes. That was the difference.
Well, look at Alabama.
Well, look at Alabama. Down in Alabama, I'm the only guy who was invited to go in there as one of my colleagues says, African-American colleagues, you're the only white boy invited to Alabama. Well, because the guy who ran and won used to work for me. I know him well. He headed up Biden for president back when I was a 42-year-old kid running for the presidency of the United States at Stanford Law School. Yeah. And we were able to draw crowds of 3,000 and 4,000 people for him and with him. He won a close race, but he energized your generation. He energized young people.
Yep.
And so it's just all on the margins. And if you ever have to wonder
Yeah.
whether or not a single vote matters, I'm the only guy that went out and campaigned for Connor Lamb. I know Pennsylvania, it's like my home, my native state. I've been in this state my whole career because Philadelphia covers over 65% of the market, and I was covered as much as anybody because of the rules you have to cover Delaware. I'm as well known in Pennsylvania as a senator as the senators were. And I went in, and guess what? 600 votes.
Yeah.
600 votes. Now, that was a gigantic win, but 600
There are twice
votes.
as many people right here today as
So
the
guys,
margin.
it really
That's
does
pretty
matter.
amazing.
And you have no excuse. There's no, I really mean it. You have no excuse. There's no place to hide. Plato, to paraphrase Plato, he said, the penalty good people pay for not being involved in politics is being governed by men worse than themselves. You deserve exactly what you get if you don't vote.
So it's a good message. It's an important message.
They can change it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very. So let's move to foreign policy. You and Michael Carpenter co-authored a piece which I found very important and provocative, entitled How to Stand Up to the Kremlin, right? Wasn't that the title? How to Stand Up to the Kremlin. And in it, you said that a lot depended on civil society for actors, in other words, non-government action as well as government action. But you really focused on how, in this climate, non-government actors could make a difference. Would you say some more about what you think we and others can do in the presence of the, I'll just call it a threat of what Russia is trying to do, both here at home and in England and around the world?
Well, President Gutmann provided me an enormous platform to set up the Biden Center here, and gave me the funding for some very serious staff. People who, if I had run and won, would be running the State Department, the Defense Department. I mean, really very, very across the board, highly respected people in both parties. And Mike Carpenter is one of those guys who was a major figure in the Defense Department and works here at Penn with us now. And what we wrote about was the pernicious influence of Russia on one thing that we need the most, the post-World War II liberal world order.
Right.
If you look at the mission statement for the Biden School of Diplomacy here, it's about maintaining that liberal world order.
Say what you mean by that, because
I will.
There are a lot of people here who study international relations and international politics, but it's a very important phenomenon of the post-World War II era.
After World War II, principally the United States and Britain, but all the West, got together and said, what institutional structures do we build to make it much more difficult for individuals and nations to abuse power in the future? So you set up everything from the UN to the situation, the World Bank, the NATO, to the EU later on, a whole range of international institutions. They were designed to make it difficult for any one player to go out and abuse their power, to undo the civil society that existed. And it's been the most successful effort in modern history. And for 70 years, it's kept basically kept the peace. More than fewer people are dying today, notwithstanding what you read on your phone, than any time in the history of the world. We're in a situation where we have the strongest alliances, literally, in the history of the world. We're in a situation where, but that's being frayed now. And what Russia is doing in a very calculated way, trying to undermine the very institutions that prevent them from exercising and abusing power. And that's why they're trying to dismantle NATO, they're trying to dismantle the EU, they're trying to dismantle most of the international institutions that exist, because that allows them free rein. Simultaneously, in the United States, Britain, and other places, there's a rise of two twin pillars that are incredibly dangerous to our security overall and our well-being. One is this half-baked spurious nationalism, which is America first, and there's a zero-sum game. You win, I lose. I win, you lose. Instead of building on what we have been for the last 70 years, this notion that America benefits, humanity benefits when countries become more democratic, when they become more open. It's overwhelmingly in our interest that Europe be democratic, free, and whole. It's overwhelmingly in our interest to see to it, because those institutions, when they exist, are less likely to generate conflict. And so it's in our interest. And so what's happened is this rise of this nationalism, coupled with this phony populism. Phony populism, by that I mean the idea that whatever problem you have, whatever problem exists, is because of the other. It's because of that black guy, it's because of that immigrant, it's because of the other are causing my problems. And it all takes place at a moment when you are going to be teaching here at Penn or other great universities, and you're going to be teaching a course about how we did not understand we were in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution. Because of digitalization, because of Moore's Law, because of globalization, because of a whole range of things, an awful lot of people are frightened and economically being left behind. It's generated more wealth than any time in the history of the world, but it's also generated the widest income gap in the history of the United States of America. No democracy can be sustained when there is not generally equal growth. The basic bargain's been broken. Between 1978 and 2008, between 1948 and 78, productivity rose 91%. Middle-class wages, productivity grew. Middle-class wages grew the same amount. Wages grew 90%. Between 78 and 08, what happened, and 16, wages grew, productivity grew 68%, wages grew 13%. The bargain's been broken. It used to be a deal. If I participated in the enterprise and it generated income and profit, I got to participate in the profit. Not anymore. Some of that's because of globalization, some of that's because of digitalization, some of that's but a lot of it has to do with bad policy we've slipped into. I have a cartoon in my office that my staff keeps trying to take down. And for the last 5 years, I'm not joking, because it's provocative. It's from the New Yorker. It's a picture of a great big rotund guy in a black turtleneck sweater, black mask, and black beret, sitting at a table being interrogated by a police officer. And there's a great big bag on the table with a dollar sign on it. And he's looking at the interrogator and said, "How was I supposed to know he was a job creator?" Since when did the only job creators become investors? My father sold an awful lot of GM products as a manager of a major GM dealership. He created tens of thousands of jobs. Everybody out there, not just the investor, creates jobs, but the distribution of income is wrong. It's not consistent. So what happens is people are angry. And I'll give you one last example. I'm sorry these are such, I wish there were easier questions to answer more quickly. But for example, I got a friend in Delaware. Grew up with him in a little town called Claymont, a little steel town. And he went to high school. That's where, as far as he went. And he became an independent trucker. Breaks his neck. He makes $80,000 to $100,000 a year, busting his neck over the road. I don't know how many hours a week or a month. I saw him. I said, "How you doing?" He said, at Christmas time, he said, I had to give it up. He said, "Only you politicians, Joe, can continue to work. You never worked that hard." And he said, I retired. I said, "How about your son who's an independent trucker?" He said, "He's good, Joey," but he said, he knows he's in trouble. These people aren't stupid. You know why he's in trouble? Every one of you brilliant young people who are here, particularly in the tech side, know that is expected within 5 years there are going to be driverless trucks. He's not going to have a job. Not going to have a job. I can name you 20 professions. Look at the number of salespeople we lost. Average income, $40,000 a year. We lost over 100 or 240,000 in 10 months. Why? Not bad thing. Amazon comes along. Amazon comes along, and all of a sudden retail outlets are closing. Now, I think those 200 or some got replaced by 28,000 workers. People are frightened. And when they're frightened, they're susceptible to demagoguery. They're susceptible to this stuff.
So I'm going to play professor now just for a moment. What about standing up to Russia here? I mean, how does, because I know it relates, but.
Well, you're exactly right. The reason Russia is having the effect it's had is playing to all of these fears in Europe. And it also is engaging in cyber warfare. And it is invading the sovereignty of so many countries, the way they attempt to manipulate what's going on in the cyberspace. And so, for example, Putin, who I know fairly well personally, is one tough guy who has, I think, has no really moral center to him. No. By the way,
you said something even worse to his face, right?
Well,
so
it wasn't worse. Look.
No, he took it as a compliment.
Yeah, all politics.
It's true. It's true.
Look,
Tell him the story.
Folks, all politics is personal. You have to understand what makes the other person tick. You have to understand it, particularly foreign policy. All foreign policies is a logical extension of personal relationships with a lot less information to go on. So when I was last with Putin for 5 hours in his office, and afterwards went in his office, I returned to the office, and I happened to be eye to eye with him. I looked at him, I said, he had an interpreter, I had an interpreter. And I said, Mr. President, I'm looking in your eyes, and you have no soul. It wasn't meant to be derogatory. He looked me back in the eye, so we understood each other. He said, quote, we understand one another. Not a joke. This is deadly, deadly, deadly earnest. You got to understand what the other guy or the other woman is about. And that's what he's about. Yeah. It's about deconstructing this liberal world order so he has more room to abuse power. Because look, Russia is a third world country, at least a second world country. Not a joke. Their population is declining precipitously, 148 million people now. They have the highest rate of alcoholism and their life expectancy is increasingly diminishing, not getting higher. They're a federation where a significant part of the federation is not Russian, it is Muslim. They are a second-rate country, but for nuclear weapons. They have enormous resources. They have no means by which to generate those resources to put to good use. They need Western technology. You'd think the answer was, what we tried to do was open them to the West, give them association status with NATO, et cetera. Yeah. But he chose a different route. And the reason he did, which is a critical point, it's a kleptocracy. Yeah. This is not about the Russian people versus the United States or the West. This is about the Russian people versus a kleptocracy. A small group of men who are not so much ideologically driven, but driven to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, which is they control. They control. And the reason why they're going after the West as hard as they can to deconstruct these democratic institutions is they don't want their people to get a whiff of what democracy is really like. By the way, you realize that, you've seen it recently, the involvement, their aggressive and illegal and international violations of the sovereignty of Ukraine. They're telling the Russian people, we are not involved in Ukraine. It is a federal crime in Russia if you report the death of a Russian soldier. You say, no, we are not involved. We are not involved in Ukraine. So this is one big charade, and they cannot let the truth come through. And we should be much more aggressive in making it clear to the Russian people what is going on. And we're not. We're not. We used to have things like Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which, by the way, are required to be. I used to head them as the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. They're required to have journalistic integrity. They are not allowed to spread propaganda, for real, not a joke, not a joke, but just the truth. And we have been too silent about Russian engagement in nefarious activities that are dangerous, to the point that I suggested in this article that there should be a 9/11 type commission in Europe to investigate the degree to which the Russians have interfered surreptitiously in elections in Europe. And I get a call from the former head of NATO, Rasmussen. I'm going over to see him shortly, and because we put together a group of about 8 heads of state, and we're setting up such a commission. Because the one way to stop this kind of nefarious activity the Russians are engaged in is expose what it is. Expose what it is, like happened in the French election. They exposed what Russia was doing, and it had no impact. But in Italy, they did not. They did not. And they were extremely successful in deconstructing that government. So there's so much more to say about it, but we have to stand up. We have to stand up. And we have to be, by the way, just like in the middle of the Cold War, we have to be ready to talk to Russia about anything that has to do with our mutual interest, like strategic doctrine on nuclear weapons, instead of deciding that we're going to have a race on nuclear weapons. So there's a lot. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And right now we're doing neither.
Terrific. Not terrific that we're doing neither, but great answer, great answer. So I want to leave a lot of time. We've collected questions from people in the audience, but before we get to those, what I sometimes like to do, if you'll agree to this, is a lightning round at the end. I'll ask you 3 questions, and just whatever comes to the top of your mind as answers, okay? Okay? So, okay?
Yep.
Agree? Okay. So I've done this with students up here and with other people as well, but never with you, Mr. Vice President. So here it goes. When you were a college student, who were your 3 role models?
Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and my father.
Oh, okay. And that's terrific.
It's a surprise.
No women, but we'll. I know very strong women came into your life afterwards, so, but they're hard to beat.
No, I tell her why they were, because in the middle of the 2 things I was deeply involved
I'm
in.
not supposed to criticize your lightning answers, so
because Martin Luther King was assassinated my
Wonderful.
senior year, and so was Robert Kennedy, my political hero. And they were involved in the 2 things I was most deeply involved in leading, the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement.
Yeah. So second, and I'll never forget the days that Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King were assassinated. Those were, we talk about perilous and polarized times, but nothing like that, really. So second question. If you could dine with 3 people, any 3 people throughout history, not any time in history, okay? 3 people, who would you dine with? You all should think of who you'd answer to.
Muhammad, Jesus Christ, not a joke, and Leonardo da Vinci.
Whoa, okay. And third lightning round question, third hardest, most important. Pen in 3 words.
Engaged, enlightened, and an opportunity.
Well, hear, hear. Like it. Okay, now for the real questions. Let's start with an engineering student. Cheyenne, are you here?
Cheyenne, stand up, man.
S-H-Y-A-M.
So we
There.
can see you.
Yes, great. So,
Are you mad I didn't say Einstein?
so
Are you angry I didn't say Einstein? I'm sorry, go ahead.
here, I'll read the question, but you stay standing. What advice do you have for someone running for office today? Great question.
Several pieces. One, know what you're willing to lose over. If you don't know what you're willing to lose over, get engaged in another project. You'll do better, you'll be happier, and you'll be more successful. But I really mean it. You have to know what you believe and what you are unwilling to trade status for and give up something you care deeply about. The second thing I would say is that never underestimate the ability of the human mind to rationalize. Well, I can vote for this even though I really don't agree with it because it's a useful thing for me to be able to do because it will help me get this and that and the other thing. It's a rationalization that I've found of the people I most admire in both parties has never, ever, ever worked. It takes you down a rabbit hole. The third thing I would say is that understand that still the overwhelming currency, the coin of the realm is your word, For your constituency to know that whatever you say, you mean, and whatever you say you'll do, you'll do. Because there is reward in that. What surprises me so much about my colleagues today, my former colleagues, the new folks in the Senate and the House, is they don't realize that you reward people, even if they disagree with you, for saying something they really believe and giving a firm rationale for it and knowing that they're not going to make you happy. You still reward them, unless it's on the extreme. Unless they're on the extreme. My son Bo and I are the only 2 Democrats to win the southern part of the state of Delaware. I'm the only person in the United States Senate that was able to, the entire time he was in the Senate, get a majority, the only Democrat, to get a majority of the white male vote and 98% of the black vote. Because in southern Delaware, they talk at you like this, and it's a different state, for real. If you want to know about Delaware, read Mitcher's book, Chesapeake. Delmarva Peninsula has been isolated for over 220 years. We were a slave state to our great shame. Very conservative, very different. But they poll people down there and say, damn, I don't agree with the boy. But he tells you what he thinks, honest. I'll take it. It matters that your word, and it's not situational. There's a new way of giving your word today in the Senate. Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'll vote for you. I'll vote for that. And then the vote comes along and says, geez, I didn't know it was going to hurt me on this, and so I can't. Your word is your word is your word is your word. I think they're the 3 most important things you should know about getting engaged in public life, and I hope you do.
There you go. Ryan Young, is Ryan here? Ryan, great. Ryan, what year are you? Junior? And what are you studying? political science. So here's the question. What do the meetings between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un and eventually Kim's meeting with President Moon mean for U.S. diplomacy in Asia?
It's unknown right now, but I'll tell you what I think. And nobody knows. Anybody gives you an answer to that, disregard them. Number one, in my humble opinion. Number one, Xi Jinping, who I've said this to this audience before, I know better than any other world leader because I've spent more time with him. I've spent 25 hours of private dinners with him, just he and I, because his predecessor and my boss, Barack, thought we should get to know one another. So I traveled about 17,000 miles in China with him, 7,000 miles here, and we went and we had a lot of serious discussions. And Xi Jinping knows what he wants. What he wants is he wants a peninsula that preferably is nuclear free, but absolutely necessarily not dominated by the United States of America and the West, and with significant forces on that peninsula. And you have the president of South Korea wanting to avoid almost at all costs, short of surrender, open war, because immediately 160,000 South Koreans would die just from artillery fire. Nothing, I mean, without use of any weapon at all, because of so much heavy artillery that is within less than 60 miles of the capital of South Korea. And so he is very concerned about the bellicoseness of the United States policy right now and the taunting of the North Korean president. In North Korea, I think what he wants is three things. And two of the three are very, very dangerous. One, he has reached the conclusion that if he is a nuclear power, he is guaranteed that no regime change will take place, because the alternative to take him down is so disastrous for the peninsula and for the region that no one, quote unquote, would do it. Secondly, what he wants to be in a position where he is able to economically have the benefits of the South and see a unification with control from the North. That's not going to happen, but that's the hope. But thirdly, he is worried about isolation. He's worried about isolation, and he's done a remarkable job, if you think about it, in the last 4 months. A remarkable job of essentially, when the noose was tightening on him and the economic price they were paying was getting higher and higher, what did he do? He decided to, I think, make a very smart play. He made the play at the Olympics. He appealed to South Korean fear and came off as "we should talk. Maybe things can get better with us," because he was scared to death of the Trump administration's rhetoric about, you know, this, what do you call him, this little guy, anyway, you know, and so the South was very, very concerned about whether or not there would be, you know, actually an open war. And so many people would die. And so I think he found a way temporarily out, but he's got a dilemma now too. He's in a position where he's going to have to deal with the prospect of some kind of long-term answer to ameliorating the continued escalation on the nuclear side, or eventually the sanctions are going to start to fall back in place worldwide. And so I think the problem, I compliment the administration for being willing to sit down and negotiate. I don't want to be critical because I may be dead wrong about this, but let me tell you what I do know. I do know having a summit before you've worked out the details is something that doesn't happen. It's a very dangerous way to go about it. And so I hope that the administration has decided what constitutes a victory for them. What is the end goal they're looking for? And I hope they realize this is going to be a long process, a process It's going to take months to years to get to a place where there's been diminishment of tensions, a pulling back on the nuclear threshold, and an agreement whereby Japan, South Korea, China, the United States are all on the same basic page about what has been worked out with North Korea. And that's really, this is a very intractable problem. We weren't able to solve it. Our two predecessors weren't able to solve it. But one thing I do know, I believe, and that is you've got to have Japan, South Korea, and the United States all on the same page. And if you look what's happening now, Japan is reaching out directly to North Korea. And I would argue, I don't know, I would point out that it's because of, let me say it another way. My dad used to have an expression. He'd say, the only war that's worse than one that is intended is one that is unintended. What people worry a great deal about in the region is the unintended first shot being fired. The unintended. The idea that if you're certain I'm about to attack you, you're not going to wait to be attacked. Up to now, that has always been in question. But the rhetoric up to now has been, well, and especially with a man I know well, he's very, very bright. I led the effort to prevent him from being the ambassador of the United Nations and defeated him, a guy named Bolton. He is a very different view, a very aggressive view, and I don't know where that takes us. And I don't know where the president, I don't know who the president's listening to. But I do think if I were in his spot, I would have reached out and I would have been willing to talk. Would have been willing to talk. That's a good thing. But it can't be haphazard. This has to, I'm just praying that he has done his homework. Now, I'm not being a wise guy when I say that. Keep in mind, this is a man who never been involved in any of these issues before, didn't expect to win, won, hadn't even put together a transition team that he was going to bring in because he never thought he was going to win. And so this is learning on the job. And at least up to now, there has not been a lot of evidence that he is fastidious about learning. Hope I'm wrong.
Yep. Cleo's son, a first-year student. Cleo? Hi. Hi. Looking back at your work with President Obama, what things do you miss most?
Well, I miss our lunches together. For real. No, look, the president's become a close personal friend. Most of there are a group of vice presidential scholars who have rewritten a lot since we left. And whether it's true or not, most of them argue that there's never been a president and a vice president that have been as close personally with one another. I think there was one other that was closer. And that we had each other's back. When the president asked me to join him, it's now public knowledge, I said no, I did not want to be vice president. I genuinely did not want to be vice president because all the vice president is standby equipment, breaks a tie vote and reads the results of the Electoral College vote in the House of Representatives. But things have changed so drastically in terms of all the problems the president faces. He or she has to be in a position where there's somebody whose judgment they trust and who they trust in terms of their being willing to be consistent with what the president wants done. And when I when we finally worked this out, after some time that I would take the job, I told the president that I would be loyal to him, and if we ever had a fundamental or moral disagreement, I would resign. I would develop prostate cancer. By the way, not a joke. I would not, and I told him straight up. He's written about it, and he knows I meant it. But I felt that he and I were politically simpatico, and we had the same value set. And as a consequence of that, we became very close friends. Our wives are very close friends. I have a young granddaughter that's here. I'm going to embarrass her, at Penn. She's a freshman. Her sister and she are extremely close with Melania. Well, actually, they know the other Melania, but with Malia and Sasha. My Sasha is, you know, when I go on vacation, when my son and his family go on vacation, Sasha goes on vacation. My granddaughter just spent her spring break with Sasha. They're in the same class, same small class. When they decided to move to Washington after getting elected to the Senate, they asked me where I thought they should go. I put them in touch with my son-in-law and my son and my daughter-in-law, and they become really very, very close personal friends. But I want to make one thing clear. Barack made the first friendship bracelet, not me. But you know, when you see and you watch another woman or man under enormous pressure, and you watch them react, in the way Barack has, it generated nothing but admiration. He's the brightest president I ever served with, and I've served with 8. I'm including Clinton, I'm including all of them. Just in pure, raw, gray matter, the grasp of data and information, he's the brightest person I ever knew. And he's the most self-aware president I've ever worked with. By self-aware, I mean he has no illusions about himself or about the circumstance he finds himself. I remember when there was one particular congressman that early on was extremely rude, almost evidencing a prejudice in the Oval Office. After the meeting was over, the president opens the door of the Oval and all the congressmen, whoever is meeting, walk out, and I'm always at all those meetings. And I started to follow him out, and he grabbed me. He said, well, can you just stick back a second, Joe? And everybody left. Said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go talk to him. And he said, don't. I said, I'm not going to let him talk to you like that ever again. It's wrong. And he said, Joe, you don't understand. He said, you got to take the good with the bad. He said, the truth of it is, I wouldn't be. He said, do you think I would have beaten you? Do you think I would have beaten Hillary had I not gotten an overwhelming percentage of the black vote? He said, what do you think happens, Joe? He said, you take the good with the bad, pal. You take the good with the bad. So there's no illusions about anything. He is, and he is deeply, deeply, deeply moral and honorable. And so it's ended up being a friendship that will last the rest. We still get together. We still see each other. He keeps saying we ought to play golf on Wednesdays. How the hell do you have the time to play golf? She makes me work on Wednesday. How the hell do you have time to play golf?
Proud of it, too.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I enjoyed his company, and I think he enjoyed mine. And I knew it was going to work the night we both got nominated out in Denver. And because I won't embarrass which granddaughter, but one of my granddaughters came to me and said, Pop, they call me Pop, he said, this is now almost 10 years ago. He said, Pop, can we have, and then this one referred to the president as Barack at the time. Can we have Barack and his kids come and sleep with us over here? Because we had an extra room. And Barack's cousins come and sleep, meaning the First Lady's brother's children. And so Jill called down, my wife, and they came and we emptied the room, took the beds out, brought in sleeping bags, and I knew it was going to work. It's going to sound corny. As I left to go over to be sworn and be nominated, I opened the door and I saw a total of 7 kids, little black boys and white girls and white boys and black girls, sleeping in the same sleeping bag with their heads popping out. Saying goodnight, I knew it was going to work. I just knew.
Wonderful. Henry Underwood? Henry? Introduce yourself. Okay, a sophomore from England who studies communications. Mr. Vice President, how do you maintain good working relations and effective team dynamics in a high-pressure environment like the White House?
Well, you treat everybody with respect. Not a joke. Every single person is entitled to be treated with dignity. And there is never a circumstance, no matter what the status of the person working in the White House is, to treat them with disrespect. Never. And I mean never. And we never did. We never did. Whether it was the cleaning ladies who came in and cleaned their offices at night, or whether or not as the National Security Advisor. You treat with respect, number one. Number two, it's important to get to know one another. Guys, you can't let networking become a verb. Not a joke. You gotta look people in the eye. You gotta say hi to them. You gotta get to know them. And there wasn't a single person who worked for me that I didn't get to know, or people who worked in the White House. So I had very close friendships with the President's national security advisors, as well as his chiefs of staff. I spent a lot of time with the folks that worked for him, and we interchanged. We had basically a unified staff. When we got to the White House, I knew more of the people we were appointing to the cabinet than the president did. I mean, he knew them, and he picked them. I happen to agree with them. That's not why he picked them. But I knew them personally for a long time. Tom Donilon, the national security advisor, used to work for me. I would just go down the list. And so we had this staff where we knew one another, and we had essentially a unified staff. Steve Ricchetti, my chief of staff, is here, and now up here at Penn. You know, he can tell you, he has long, deep personal relationships. And it matters showing up. So, you know, it's just like any other relationship. When you have a close friend who lost their mom, well, you show up, man. You let them know you know. If you have somebody who you work with who's going through a tough time, it matters to stop and say, what can I do? Can I help? That's how our White House worked. If you notice, you never heard in 8 years, you never heard of a conflict between the president and vice president's staff. Not one single time. And you never heard one single scandal out of that administration. But think about the people you trust. The people you trust and people open up to you, who you know. You get a sense of who they are. And it really is important. And by the way, for you students, even people who you strongly disagree with, get to know them. Get to know them. It matters. It matters.
Nick Gaidai? Nick, where are you? And please pronounce your last name for me. Guy Dai. Introduce yourself.
I'm from Ukraine. I'm first year working in PhD.
So Nick's question is, what advice do you have for Ukraine's leaders in how to stand up to the Kremlin? Great follow-up.
I'm from Ukraine too, as you probably know. I've spent a great deal of my career and been to Ukraine a couple dozen times. And up until I left, I'm probably on the phone, without exaggeration, 3 times a week with Ukrainian leaders of all political stripes and parties. Ukrainian people are an enormously gifted group of people. But they have never been a democracy. Never. But the revolution of dignity has provided the first opportunity for Ukraine to really, actually, for the first time in its history, deliver for its people and its children and grandchildren a democracy. But in Ukraine, like all former Soviet republics, corruption is endemic. Corruption is endemic. And so I have spent an enormous amount of my time, as you know, if you're Ukrainian. It sounds self-serving, but there are not many Ukrainians who don't know who I am because I've spent so much time. I'm not joking, as you know, because I care. I care. You know, the problem with you guys is, you know, you climb in our life and you steal our hearts. But corruption is endemic. The oligarchs are really some really bad guys. And so there's very few people who are in positions to be able to have influence on the outcome of the Ukrainian people and government who haven't been touched in some way, because the only way they can make it, by some of the corruption on the edges. And Ukraine has gone a long way in setting up institutional changes that make a difference in terms of Western institutional changes. They're increasing significantly transparency. But you're about 3/4 of the way there. 3/4 of the way there. And what I always say to President Poroshenko and to Arseny and Yatsenyuk, anyway, and the new prime minister, new year, is that their only chance is to convince, back up, if it were not for President Obama, and I'll be blunt, and me, there would be no sanctions on Russia. You know that. The rest of Europe would just like you to go away. Like you to go away. What I often hear is the following. Look, when you guys took office, Ukraine was under the thumb of Russia. What's changed? So what if it's under the thumb of Russia again? There's no strategic impact on us. My response always was, it's pay me now or pay me later. Now that Ukraine went through the courage and the dignity of the revolution of dignity, people on rooftops being shot and killed from snipers, and you threw out a bum who headed to Moscow with everything but his zoo that he left behind, what happened? If we did not stand with you, the rest of Eastern Europe would fall. They conclude that we would not do what we said we would do in terms of NATO countries. And you see the troubles going on in Poland now. You see the troubles going on in Romania, in Moldova, and a whole range of Eastern European countries. But I literally would be on the phone once a week, at a minimum, with the heads of state in Eastern Europe and Western Europe saying, you must stay with us. You must impose the sanctions. And they're up against it now. What's happened is that the economy has grown in Ukraine, but with it, there has been a backsliding because this administration has not been deeply engaged in making sure that the political institutions that they, in fact, have set up actually continue to adhere to the principles they said they would agree to in terms of transparency. One of the most important speeches I ever gave was to the Rada. You probably, I'm going to say something, some of you probably read it. And it is, it still holds. Because the people who are in charge of your country now, if they do it right, will be remembered by your children and your grandchildren as the founders of the first truly democratic Ukraine. But there's still a lot of push internally between the East and the West, the line of control, what Russia is doing and continuing to meddle. We've never recognized, and we've insisted the rest of the world not recognize, what is essentially the annexation of Crimea by Russia, et cetera. So this is a process. But I admire the courage. One of the things that even in my own our own administration, I got criticized for, they said we should not arm Ukrainian forces. And I reminded them of a guy named Haris Salajits, who was one of the guys involved in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he was, when Izetbegovic was the president, and I spent a lot of time in Bosnia as well. And I brought, this when I tried to get and succeeded in getting Clinton to lift the arms embargo against Bosnia and Herzegovina in the face of Slobodan Milocevic's brutality. And so I brought him over. He was a very articulate, well-educated guy. And I brought into the Senate Foreign Relations Committee room, the private room, the Republican and Democratic leaders of the other committees, armed services, intelligence, et cetera, for I was trying to talk them into voting with me and Bob Dole to lift the arms embargo that we had placed on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one of my closest friends in life, and we argue like hell, is John McCain. He's on the other team, we disagree. And so Harris was sitting there, very, very fine guy. And John and Senator Ted Stevens, who's passed away, was a hawk. He was a chairman of the Appropriations Committee. We're saying, well, we can't lift the arms embargo. You can't possibly beat Slobodan Milosevic. He has all the weapons, and more people will die if we lift the arms embargo. And this is where it relates to Ukraine. And so I turned to Harris, and I said, explain to him what's going on. And he said, he's had an incredible command of the English language. He said, gentlemen, my wife and daughter are now in the mountains freezing, trying to stay out of the grip. He happened to be a Muslim. Stay out of the grip of Slobodan Milosevic and his butchers. He said, please, do me the honor of allowing us to choose how we die. Do me the honor of allowing us to choose how we die. That's the same argument I made, which probably changed the Defense Department's view about training and reorganizing the Ukrainian army. They're serious fighters. No, they really are. They really are, as you know. And so even though if Russia decided tomorrow to roll over Ukraine, they could. But we should at least allow them to choose how they die. And guess what? Russia is backing away because of the bravery, the incredible, incredible bravery of the Ukrainian forces. Much more to say, but unfortunately, I could go on a long time about Ukraine. But you've got to, when you go home, you've got to insist on transparency, because your democracy will fail as a consequence of corruption if you do not.
So here's a final question. Thank you very much. Nicholas McCandron? Nicholas, where are you?
I thought you were calling my nephew here.
Right. All right. Nicholas, this is a very appropriate final question because you gave us the honor of being at Penn Medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine for the inauguration of the Cancer Moonshot, which you were leading. And actually, our Penn Medicine leadership is here today. And Nicholas, why don't you introduce yourself and then I'll ask your question.
I'm an alumnus of the medical school here and have stayed on since graduation for residency, now fellowship in oncology, so I'm in my last year of medical oncology.
So wonderful. Nicholas is in his last year of his residency in medical oncology. And here's Nicholas's question. Where do you see the cancer moonshot going?
This is a really, really important question. It's become the passion of my life. And I used to have an irreverent uncle who was a brilliant guy, well-educated, and he'd say, Joe, never try to pound 10 pounds of sand in a 5-pound bag. Well, I kind of did by taking on the responsibility here at Penn, which is a great honor, and at Delaware on domestic policy, and staying with the Biden Cancer Initiative, which has grown exponentially. Here's the situation, guys. And I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. First of all, the head of your effort is one of the great doctors and scientists in the world. He's come up with some breakthroughs that are no more than probably 4 dozen people in modern history have ever been able to do. The Abramson Center is one of the finest in the world. It's not hyperbole. It's not because I'm associated with Penn. It's a fact, number one. But number two, what I got deeply involved when my son, Bo, was diagnosed, who was a Penn graduate, diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma. As Doc can tell you, it's essentially a death sentence. I've only found 2 people who've survived. The question is Doc will tell you how long, whether it's 9 to 12 months or some can you extend, there's been those who have extended life up to almost 5 years, a couple. And so I did what you would do as a brother, a sister, a father, a mother. I tried to learn everything I could about what was available for treatment. My son happened to be at MD Anderson when his diagnosis occurred. And what I found out was startling. I found out that the doctor's profession and the cancer effort is the most disorganized in the world, of any business in the world. I can go on my cell phone and tell you what's going to play in a movie theater in Bemidji, Minnesota tonight at 7 o'clock. He can't tell you, as bright as he is, where a particular effort is being, where there's a study going on involving people who have a particular type of cancer to even get his patient into that study. Right? I mean, I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Now, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Not because the most dedicated, brilliant people I've met, and I spent a lot of time when I first got to the Senate because the only issue in the game was, in foreign policy, was strategic doctrine, nuclear weapons. That was the issue between the United States and Russia. And I wanted to be in a position where I would never be intimidated on the floor when I was debating. So I spent a lot of time at the national laboratories learning about how you make a nuclear weapon, learning what the PSI of an SS-18 Soviet silo is, knowing trajectory, just so I would be informed and I couldn't have somebody come in on the right and just overwhelm me with facts that I didn't know how to respond to make light of an argument I was making about arms control. Well, these guys and women are as bright as any people I've ever worked with in my life. But here's the deal. Back in 1972, when Nixon declared the war on cancer, he had no army, he had no tools, he had no soldiers. And at the time, as Doc will tell you, the medical profession thought there was a single cancer, basically. Well, there are identified at least, correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, at least 204 different cancers out there. At least 204, requiring different regimes to deal with them. We found out since in the last 45 to 50 years, we've learned so much more. For example, we now have the capacity to do 1,000,000 billion calculations per second on a computer. So for example, if I had, we can now do we can take a cancer cell and we can do a genetic study on that cell and find out precisely what the cancer is by running a test that takes a week and less than a week. Used to cost, literally, it would have figuratively cost $150,000 to do before. Now it's down to $1,000. And you can find out right away exactly what strain of cancer you have, what the protein of that cancer is, et cetera. If I was able to take every single solitary cancer genome that had been done, put it in one single repository, and put this computer capability to work on, I could find out distributions and patterns like studying the stars, is why with the same cancer each of you have, why did this particular cancer therapy work on you and not on you? We don't know. Cancer is an incredibly, incredibly insidious enemy. It hides. It hides its healthy cells. It gets in your bloodstream. It reproduces itself. It does all these things that 70 years ago, 50 years ago, we didn't know. But what I found out when I started all this research going around the country and around the world, because I had the access of being vice president to have anybody who would be willing to talk to me, and one of the first places I came was here, is that my boy died about 2 years ago now, a little over 2 years ago. When he was diagnosed, it was only 5 years before that your profession reached a sort of an inflection point. Up to that time, immunotherapy was viewed as a voodoo science, although it appeared in the turn of the century, 1905, 6, and 7. It was disregarded. It was viewed as a useless undertaking. You didn't have radiology, folks working with chemical engineers. You didn't have people who were engaged in a whole range of pursuits that are necessary now, we know, to actually determine how cancer occurs and how to stop it. And so we reached this inflection point. But still, nobody was talking to anybody, really. There's these silos that are set up. Because the initial image and the idea back in 1972 with Nixon was, there was going to be a Jonas Salk who was going to go into a laboratory and find that silver bullet. Hospitals didn't have a way to share information or data back then, but they never changed. This guy's an oncologist. He may have or may not have sought a grant to do a study. He has to be associated with a laboratory. Somebody already there who is established. He may be brighter and smarter than the person who has the laboratory, but he can't get a grant to do it at NIH the way these are given. Secondly, if you are an astrophysicist and you go to NASA for a grant to study the seventh ring of Saturn, the deal is, the day your study is done, you have to publish it for the whole world to see. Docs are supposed to, these cancer researchers are supposed to publish every one of their studies immediately upon its conclusion, whether it fails or succeeds, because you can learn from failure. Well, guess what I found out when I started the moonshot? 80% never file their studies. So you never find out, you're researching, that somebody already did the same thing and what mistakes they made. So I came along because the president gave me, not jokingly, absolute authority to run this. I had the ability to hire and fire. And I said, I got an idea. Every doc or every researcher doesn't file within the complied time, there will be a penalty of $10,000 per day personally. Well, lo and behold. Secondly, we had a thing where there's a bank collecting tissue and cancer genomes and the rest at NIH. I said, why don't we take it out and put it at the University of Chicago, make it public for everybody? There are 13,000, not specimens, 13,000 individuals, their identity private, and see how many more people we can get to put in to make available for all scientists anywhere in the world to come and study. They said, oh, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I got 10 nations to sign memorandum of understanding to do that. Well, guess what? Since we set that up, there's been 80 million hits. 80 million hits, increasing exponentially the prospect that we'll find some answers. It turns out that you'd think this would be the case already. You have a circumstance where when you do the sequencing of a cancer genome and you find out what particular cancer it is, those of you, I'll bet everyone in here, raise your hand if your mom, dad, you, or a friend of yours has suffered from cancer. Raise your hand. You got it. Okay, you understand what I'm talking about. Now here's the deal. The first treatment you get matters a lot. There's all kinds of therapies out there. But the one with the highest percentage of working increases exponentially likely you'll live. Because what happens is a lot of the very therapies that are necessary do significant damage. Radiation. As a guy that you know, I won't mention his, well, I will. A leading colleague of yours says they're going to look back on us as being brutal. There's only 3 things the last 100 years have been done. You find the cancer, you go in and you cut it out, doing a lot of damage to sometimes the healthy tissue. You got to get it out. Then you use radiation, and the radiation goes through the cancer you're killing and kills healthy cells too. And then you fill your body with toxins, with chemicals. The only thing we know. But when you think about it in raw terms, it's brutal. And so, for example, well, I won't go into it, but so what happens is, if you get the right therapy the first time, you increase exponentially your chances of beating and or living longer. So I got a phone call, and I've told this to the president before. I got a phone call from the president of IBM. He said to me, and I thought it was a joke, I didn't know who it was at first, said, would you like Watson? I think, what the hell are we talking about here? The computer, Watson. Now guess what? Watson has read every single solitary piece of literature in every language in the world ever written about cancer. So now, I said, yes, we'd like it, because the largest hospital in the world is the VA. There's more samples at the VA than anywhere in the world. And so for $1,000, at the VA, you can get your cancer genome sequenced, pumped into Watson, and in a little matter of hours, you'll find out precisely all the therapies that have ever been used on that particular cancer and their percentages. We learned, last example I give you, I could go on for too long, but it's really important. Last example is, I wondered, a lot of brilliant young guys like this doc have thought that, maybe there's no single bullet. Maybe like AIDS, there's a combination of drugs that work differently on different cancers that we can use. But guess what? You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 drug companies here. They're all working on the same particular cancer. They all are going to spend somewhere between $10 and $50 million and maybe come up with a dry hole to try to find out whether or not their particular drug will work on a particular cancer. So I said, why can't we let a brilliant young guy like this come along and say, you ought to have access to all those drugs and let him use them in combination to see what will work? Well, there's a good reason, you know, liability, economic benefit. So just like if you go into a bar or a restaurant and you want to play a jukebox, you put the money in, but you don't have to have a separate licensing agreement with Beyonce to hear her song. It's already been worked out. So we went to NIH and I said, can you work it out? So now we have a system whereby we determine that if there is this particular drug, these 6 drug companies putting your drug in, the intellectual property you belong to is worth 16%, 22%, 35%, et cetera. It's already predetermined. Liability is taken care of. And a few other things without boring you with all the details. So now what happens is, you're in a situation where what happens is that it's an economic benefit of these guys. They don't have to spend the tens of millions of dollars. We all started with 3 drug companies. Now we're up to 12. They're laying all their drugs on the table, and any qualified researcher from around the world can come in and use them in combination. Because to do it before took somewhere between a minimum of 2 years to never to get it done. Now you'd think those things would have existed, but it's all brand new. It's about changing the culture of how we deal with cancer. And not the least of which is the impediments the federal government has put up. So in the moonshot, when the president gave me authority, he gave me full authority, and I mean it sincerely, to hire and fire. There was one person in the government in a high position dealing with this issue. And I said, when are you going to have the sub-cabinet post filled? It was in March. He said, by the end of the year. I looked at my watch, I said, it's March 6th. If by April 1st you don't have it done, you're fired. Not a joke. Well, son of a gun, it got done. It wasn't that it was hard to figure out who it was, it just took time to go do it. And the thing that I hope I've injected, I think most of your colleagues would agree into this debate, is the urgency of now. Of now. This courageous doc is going to have, and he's already had, and I'm not being solicitous, some of you or someone like you coming up to him in 5 years and say, Doc, can you give me just 1 more month? I know I'm not going to, can you give me 1 month, Doc? Because I want to see my baby born, Doc. Please, Doc, just 1 month. Doc, can you give me 3 months? She's going to be married. I want to be there, Doc. Just get me by that 1 or 2 or 3 months. Every second counts. And there's a lot of things that can be done. If we didn't find one more breakthrough, if we just continue the collaboration that's now beginning, we can expand life for cancer patients significantly without a single additional breakthrough. But here's what's happening now. These guys are incredible. Women are incredible. We're finding new technologies. We know the best thing is the earlier you detect the cancer, the more likely you are to be able to deal with it. So there is a particular gene that you have that determines whether or not you have colon cancer. You can test for it if your parents had it, if it's in your bloodline. It's easy to test for it. If you test for it, it means you get a colonoscopy when you're 16, not when you wait till you're 40. And you control the polyps before it develops into anything. We now started off through the Biden initiative a thing called the blood pack. The blood pack is, these guys can, what I would call, that's not the medical term, the filings. Cancer is in your blood. Sometimes it takes 20 years to develop. But they can detect it in your blood, and they can determine, increasingly likely, determine the precise cancer it is and where it is by just taking blood tests. We're on the verge of some phenomenal breakthrough. So now you have this overwhelming cooperation in this blood pack where all these entities that were doing it separately are now starting to cooperate. You're going to find the day. By the time you guys, 5, 6 years from now, 10 years from now, when you students take your little boy or little girl to the first day of class in a public school and have them vaccinated, you're going to be able to get them vaccinated against cancer. There's already a cancer you can get vaccinated against, HPV. It's a vaccine. Just like for measles or mumps. You're going to be in a position where we're going to save a lot of lives just by not having to do extremely dangerous surgery, because you have pickup in the blood test that you have a particular cancer that can be dealt with. There's so many things that are happening because of brilliant minds like his. And so there's hope, but if we don't fundamentally change, there will be 29 million people in the world who will get cancer next year. I mean, by 2022. More people will die in China in 2025 of cancer than all the rest of the world combined. You know why? Because they have an aged population because of their one-child policy. Cancer and age are related, and they're the world's largest population. It's gigantic, but the progress is real. When we did the moonshot, the way it came about, and I'll end with this, I walked out into the Rose Garden when I announced formally I wasn't going to run for president the last time. The president wanted to come out with me. Jill and I, he said, why don't you make your announcement at the Rose Garden? I want to stand with you when you do it. And I said spontaneously, it wasn't part of anything prepared, I said, I have one regret. I would have liked to have been the president to preside over the end of cancer as we know it. Not all cancer is ending, as we know it. And 6, 8, 10 days later, the State of the Union, the president used to always surprise me. He'd never tell me what he was going to say. Those of you who watch that stuff would turn in, and Joe's going to do the following, right? Well, he turned to me and said, we're going to do a moonshot, and Joe's going to be mission control. First time I heard about that. But my generation can almost recite verbatim Kennedy's speech on going to the moon. But there's one line in it that best describes where we are in cancer, in my view right now. It wasn't about cancer, obviously. He said, because we as a nation are unwilling to postpone. Unwilling to postpone. America is unwilling to postpone any longer. Full-blown, unrelenting, coordinated effort to defeat cancer. And the example I'll give you, it's the only bipartisan thing left. As we left the United States presidency and vice presidency, because I was the guy who handled congressional relations, as of, I guess it was probably late October, I think it was Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, Republican-controlled Congress said we're going to pass no more spending bills, period, nothing. And 2 really brilliant Republicans and 2 really brilliant Democrats have been working on what they call the Cures Bill. It was over $6.3 billion. And I got engaged just before Christmas in detail. There were only in the Senate 44 people who were going to vote for the Cures Bill, and only 102 in the House. By the time we got finished working together, 398 congressmen voted for it, and a near unanimous United States Senate. And I got to preside over that as president of the Senate. Unless you think there's no comedy in the place anymore, Mitch McConnell is one tough guy. When the bill passed, part of it is 1.9 billion is just for cancer. And he stood on the floor and he asked unanimous consent that it be named after my son, Beau Biden. The Beau Biden Cancer Initiative. And right after that, President Trump put in his budget, which was in early February. And he called for cutting NIH by $9 billion. Went to work with my friends, Republicans, leading the fight. They not only rejected cutting $9 billion, they added $2 billion. And in this bill that just passed that the president said he didn't want to sign, remember the spending bill? There's another $9 billion. We're going to beat this sucker because of guys like you, Doc. Thank you.
So, fabulous questions, and your third word to characterize Penn characterizes our thanks to you for giving us the opportunity to hear you speak your mind on such an amazing range of important questions. So join me in thanking Vice President Biden.
Can I say one thing? Guys, folks, being up here, being a professor is one of the honors of my life. And Amy, the president, she asked me, she said, how can we get international figures and national figures to participate more in this initiative? And I said, if we had space that made, well, Penn has made an enormous investment in the most expensive real estate in Washington for real, the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution overlooking the United States Capitol. And we have interns now down there, and I hope you'll come. I hope you'll come down and see what we do. We have a full-blown, serious staff. I'm on campus as well, but I hope you come because you would be so proud. Penn is going to have, and it increasingly has, a presence in Washington, but also internationally. I just went and spoke at what they call the Vergunda Conference, which is a national security conference in Munich that had 21 national security leaders and 9 heads of state. And I spoke not as Senator Biden, I spoke as Professor Biden for the University of Pennsylvania. So we're raising the profile. We need you engaged, okay?